Hello warriors, this is Miss Lemons, and today I'm going to be walking you through the anatomy of the pig heart. So you'll get your heart. It's kind of hard. You can touch it with your hands. Just make sure you wash your hands after, and then just make sure you're gentle with it because they are old and you can see that they're kind of brittle. So just be gentle. When you get your heart, it's going to be in 3 pieces like this. We'll start by identifying structures on the largest part, and then we'll kind of put the heart together and start working our way through the rest. So here, if we look at the largest portion that's been given to us, the easiest structure that we can identify here is going to be the left ventricle. Now, we know that this is the left ventricle because it has this extremely thick muscular wall. And remember, this is because the left ventricle is responsible for pumping highly pressurized blood throughout the entire body. So it's unlike the right ventricle, which is much smaller, it only has to pump blood to the lungs, which is right next to the heart. This has to be able to get blood all the way up to your brain, all the way down to your feet. So it's going to be a lot stronger. So this is our left ventricle. Now, to put our heart together, we're going to look at our other pieces here and find another piece that also has thick walls. You can see that this is not as thick. Here, this is really thick. So we're going to go ahead and we can put these together. You can see that they match up thick. So those match up. You can also tell that you've done it correctly because this white tissue on the outside lines up relatively well. Okay, so we're almost done assembling or reassembling our heart here. We've got this last piece, the only way it can go in. We've got this like curvy line here. We got that same curve here. So that's where our third piece goes like this. Okay, so when we're orienting ourselves with the top of the heart, there's a few things that we should point out. First off, when we're looking at the heart, we've got 5 holes up here. 2 of them are directly related to each other. Now, the cool thing is that as you look down into these holes, you can actually see the valve tissue. That's this really white tissue inside. Pardon this, the zoom here. Let's fix that. There we go. So you can see here this white tissue. That is the valve tissue. And we can see more white tissue here. That's the valve tissue. Okay, so let's start identifying some of these structures. So you can tell the difference between arteries and veins by looking at how thick the walls are. If we look here, I mean, they all look kind of thick, but these walls here are thinner than these walls here, and you can actually kind of feel it too. So these 2 smaller sized vessels, they're definitely thicker. You can even tell just by the color of them that they are a little bit thicker. These are both arteries, so that means these both take blood away from the heart, and we'll identify those arteries in a moment. That means that these other 3 holes here are going to be veins. So all your veins are together, and your 2 arteries are right next to each other. Okay, so this first hole that we see here is actually connected to this hole here. This is your superior and inferior vena cava, your great vein, and this is going to be accepting blood that's been used up or deoxygenated by the body. So it's coming back to the heart, and so this is our vena cava. Either one of these you can identify. So when you guys are threading your hearts, you can start your thread here or here. It's the same idea. Okay, so we know that this is the superior and inferior vena cava because they share the same atrium. They dump into the same atrium. So speaking of which, the next thing you can do to start navigating your way through the heart is to stick your pen or finger even inside and then open up the heart from there. So when I open up the heart, you can see that my finger would have landed in here. So let's go ahead and remove this piece here. This right here then must be our tricuspid valve. Okay, so vena cava, remember, is right here. We put our finger in. This is going to be going through the tricuspid valve and then into this dense tissue portion. Now this is nice because we've got our left ventricle here, but in order for us to actually get into the right ventricle, we have to pass through the tricuspid valve. So that means that this little section of chamber here, it's kind of cut away. This chamber right in here where my finger is above the valve, this is our right atrium. This is the remnants of our vena cava, but it's when we get inside that we are finally in the atrium. So this right here is the atrium, this right here is the right atrium. Okay, so then we have our tricuspid valve, which is here and here because it got split in half, okay, right, because that's the first valve that we see when we enter the vena cava. And then when we go through the right atrium, through the tricuspid valve, we end up in the in the right ventricle, okay? Remember, it comes to a kind of a point. Okay, so in order for us to navigate up through the right ventricle then, we're going to put it back together. When you open this up, you can kind of see where the right ventricle is going over here. So you see that there's this little gap where the ventricle is. If you open that up, you can see that the ventricle actually goes all the way up through this artery here. So if we look, and we actually even have remnants of a valve here, that really light white tissue. It's broken away since. But if we look, this is our right ventricle, and so is this right here. So this portion right here and this tube on the inside, this is our right ventricle. So remember, this is our tricuspid valve. We come through the right atrium, through the tricuspid valve, and then into the right ventricle, which is actually here and here. Okay, so when we go out the right ventricle, we are going to be we have deoxygenated blood right now. So it needs to get reoxygenated, which means it needs to go to the lungs. So we know that this vessel then, right here, is going to be our pulmonary artery. Okay, this is our pulmonary artery. So again, through the vena cava, open it up. This is our right atrium. This is our tricuspid valve. This is our right ventricle. This is also our right ventricle. Blood will travel up through the right ventricle and out the pulmonary artery. So reorienting ourselves with the vessels. We've got superior and inferior vena cava and pulmonary artery. All right, so let's go ahead and discover the other portion of the heart. So I told you that these are going to be our veins. This right here is also a vein. Okay, so that means we have our superior and inferior vena cava and we have our pulmonary artery. So all we're missing right now is our pulmonary vein and our aorta. This right here is our pulmonary vein. Okay, so there's a lot coming back from the lungs here. Oxygenated blood is going to be coming back into the heart, and you can actually see that this cavern in here, this is our left atrium, because the pulmonary veins feed into the left atrium. And then here we have our bicuspid valve. Okay, bicuspid valve. So let's go ahead and kind of stick our pen in there, and I'm going to open up the heart so we can see where it ends up. It's actually kind of hard for us to see, but you can kind of see where my pen is peeking through. So what we're passing through, we've got our bicuspid valve. The bicuspid valve, so we have our pulmonary vein, left atrium, bicuspid valve, which is kind of coming through here, and then that bicuspid valve, we go through and into the left ventricle, which we were able to identify earlier. Okay, so then through the left ventricle, this is going to be kind of tricky for us to see because it's dehydrated. So if you look at the left ventricle, you can kind of see that we have this opening here and through here. So it's kind of dried up. We've got some valve tissue in here. This right here is going to be our aortic valve, which means that this, you can kind of see the aortic valve actually better from here, this tissue that looks like it's blocking the way. This right here would then be our aorta. Okay, now that makes sense because it's a nice thick wall. What doesn't make sense is that we're used to having really, really big vessel for our aorta. It will widen out, but really the point of the arteries is not necessarily how wide they are, but it's how thick those walls are. Okay, so if we open that up again, we got left ventricle pushes blood up through the aortic valve, out through the aorta, out through the aorta. Okay, so a quick little reorientation here. So the superior, inferior vena cava, I believe, are the easiest to locate. It's the ones where you can stick your pen through. The pulmonary vein is going to be right here. Vena cava and vein are right next to each other. They kind of form a V even, you could say. Veins form the V. And then the other two are going to be arteries. The artery in the center is your aortic artery, and the artery off to the side is your pulmonary artery. This is coming from the right side of the heart, right? This is going away from the heart out into the lungs. All right, and that is the anatomy of your pig heart.